The darkness that approached was nothing like the hollow, nothing like anything Yuna had encountered in her nightmares or her waking life. It was absence given form, a void that consumed not just dreams, but the very capacity to dream, and it moved through the hollow's realm with the patient inevitability of death itself. "What is it?" Yuna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We do not know its name," the hollow replied, clustering around her in a protective formation that would have seemed absurd just minutes ago. "The precursors called it the final silence. They created your prison to keep you contained." Yuna realized, but they also created it to keep that thing contained with you. The prison was meant to hold both of us, the hollow confirmed. But while we can only watch the dreams of sleeping beings through the cracks, the final silence can consume anything it touches. It has been feeding on you this entire time. Slowly, the hollow admitted, piece by piece, century by century, we have been its only source of sustenance in this isolated realm. Yuna watched the darkness draw closer and felt the precursor fragment inside her burning with urgent warning, screaming at her to flee while she still could. But she refused to abandon creatures she had just convinced to trust her. "When you asked me to open the door," she said slowly, "you were not trying to escape so you could feed on the galaxy. We were trying to survive." The hollow confirmed, "The final silence will eventually consume all of us, and then it will break free anyway. Except there will be nothing left to warn the waking universe about what is coming." The irony was almost too much to bear. Yuna thought bitterly. For 3 weeks she had been resisting monsters who were themselves running from something far worse. "Can it be destroyed?" she asked. "Nothing can destroy it," the hollow replied. "It is entropy given will. The end of all things made conscious and hungry." Yuna closed her eyes and reached for the precursor fragment, diving deep into the ancient knowledge that burned inside her, searching for any solution that might save both the hollow and the galaxy beyond their prison. What she found was not a weapon, but a choice. "The precursors could have tried to destroy you," Yuna said, opening her eyes with new understanding. "They had the power to unmake you entirely, but they chose containment instead, because destroying us would have unleashed the final silence immediately." The hollow explained, "We were the buffer they created, the barrier that would buy them galaxy time, but you were never meant to be prisoners forever." Yuna continued, "The seals were not just locks, they were tests, waiting for a species that could find another way." She reached out her hands toward the hollow, offering connection instead of conflict, and felt the precursor fragment responding to her intention with warmth instead of warning. "I cannot destroy the final silence," Yuna admitted, "but I can offer you something the precursors never could." "What?" the hollow asked, their borrowed faces showing desperate hope that made Yuna's heart ache. "A new way to exist," she replied, "not as predators who consume dreams without consent, but as guardians who protect dreamers from the darkness." She pulled on the golden cord connecting her to reality and felt the council's meditation ritual respond to her intention, opening a narrow passage between realms that was nothing like the door the hollow had demanded. "This is not freedom," Yuna explained. "This is partnership. You can enter the waking universe, but only by bonding with willing hosts who choose to share their dreams with you. We would be dependent on consent," the hollow said slowly, testing the idea like an unfamiliar taste. "You would be sustained by connection instead of predation," Yuna corrected, "and, in exchange, you would protect your hosts from the final silence when it eventually breaks free." The darkness was close enough now that Yuna could feel it reaching for her, could sense the void trying to consume the brightness of her human consciousness. And she knew she had only moments left to complete her offer. "Choose now," she demanded. "Partnership and survival, or isolation and slow consumption." The hollow looked at each other, their countless borrowed faces reflecting the enormity of the decision they faced. And then they turned back to Yuna with expressions that finally matched the faces they wore. "We accept," They said in voices that sounded genuinely grateful. "We choose trust." Yuna smiled and pulled them through the passage she had created, feeling the hollow flood into reality as countless streams of consciousness, seeking willing hosts across the galaxy. Behind them, the final silence roared with fury at losing its prey, but the prison held firm because its purpose had been fulfilled, and its ancient locks were designed to contain the true threat that had always lurked within. Yuna woke in the council chamber to find aliens of every species staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to wonder. And she could feel something different inside her mind, a presence that felt like a friend rather than an invader. "What have you done?" Dexari demanded. "I gave them a second chance," Yuna replied, "and I bought us time to prepare for what comes next." Across Convergence Point Station, sleeping beings woke from their nightmares with tears of relief streaming down their faces, and some of them carried new passengers in their minds. Hollow fragments that had chosen to bond rather than consume. It was not a perfect solution. And Yuna knew there would be problems as humans and aliens learned to coexist with the entities that had once been their nightmares. But it was a beginning 6 months later. Yuna stood before the Galactic Concord and explained what she had learned about the final silence, about the true threat that waited in the prison between sleep and waking, and about the alliance that humanity had forged with the very monsters they had been taught to fear. "The Hollow are not our enemies anymore," she concluded. "They are partners in the fight against something far worse." That night, when Yuna finally allowed herself to sleep without fear for the first time in months, she dreamed of starlight and warmth and the gentle presence of beings who had learned that connection was sweeter than consumption. And somewhere in the depths of her consciousness, a hollow fragment that still wore her mother's face smiled with genuine love and kept watch over her dreams until morning. The galaxy had changed forever because one exhausted human had chosen compassion over fear, just as the precursors had always hoped someone would. The realm of the Hollow looked different when Yuna entered it by choice rather than being dragged in. Against her will, she could feel the thread of consciousness connecting her to reality like a golden cord wrapped around her waist, stretching back through the void to where her body sat surrounded by aliens who were trusting her with the fate of countless worlds. "You return to us willingly," the Hollow whispered, and their voices came from every direction at once, echoing off surfaces that did not exist in any physical sense. "I return to end this," Yuna replied, and her voice carried strength that surprised even her. The Hollow materialized around her in their countless forms, wearing the faces of everyone she had ever loved and everyone she had ever lost. And Yuna forced herself to look at each borrowed face without flinching. Her mother stood directly in front of her, eyes filled with a false warmth that made Yuna's heart ache with longing for the real woman who had died so many years ago. "You cannot defeat us." The thing wearing her mother's face said gently, "We are older than your species and stronger than anything your small mind can comprehend. Then why are you so afraid of me?" Yuna asked. The Hollow went silent, their borrowed faces flickering with something that looked almost like confusion. And Yuna pressed forward with the observation that had been forming in her exhausted mind since this nightmare began. "You need me specifically to open your prison," she continued. "You have been sealed away for millions of years with access to the dreams of countless species. Yet you never found a way out until I came along. Humans are unique," the Hollow admitted reluctantly. "Your dreams burn brighter than any we have tasted, but it is more than that," Yuna said. "The precursor fragment chose me for a reason, and I do not think it was just because I happened to touch a pillar on a dead world." She reached deep inside herself, searching for the foreign presence that she had felt stirring when the council began their meditation ritual, and found it waiting for her like an ember buried in ash. "Show me," she commanded the fragment. "Show me what you know." The ember flared into flame, and suddenly Yuna understood things that no human had ever known before. The precursors had not simply sealed the hollow away and died. They had left pieces of themselves scattered across the galaxy, waiting for the right minds to find them. Waiting for beings who could do what they could not. You were never just a prison, Una breathed, comprehension flooding through her. You were a testing ground. The hollow recoiled as if she had struck them, their forms becoming less stable as genuine fear began to spread through their collective consciousness. The precursors wanted to find a species that could redeem you. Una continued. A species whose dreams were powerful enough to satisfy your hunger without destroying yourselves in the process. Lies. The hollow shrieked. But their borrowed faces could not hide the desperate hope that flickered beneath the denial. You are not evil, Una said. And the words felt true as they left her mouth. You are hungry in a way that drove you to terrible things. But hunger is not the same as malice. She opened her arms wide, making herself vulnerable in a way that went against every survival instinct screaming at her to run. I am not going to fight you, she announced. Then you will submit, the hollow said, surging toward her with ravenous intent. No, Una replied calmly. I am going to feed you. She dropped every mental barrier she had built over 3 weeks of terror and resistance, opening her mind completely to the entities that surrounded her, and instead of showing them fear, she showed them everything else. She gave them the joy of her childhood, running through fields of grass on Earth with the sun warm on her face and laughter bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her. She gave them the grief of losing her parents, the aching emptiness that never quite healed but eventually became something she could live with. She gave them love, the complicated, messy, beautiful experience of caring about other beings so deeply that their happiness became inseparable from her own. She gave them hope and despair and anger and peace, and every single emotion that humans carried through their brief, intense lives. The hollow drank it all in, overwhelmed by the flood of feeling that poured from this one small human who had somehow found the courage to offer herself freely rather than be taken by force. This is what you have been starving for, Una said as the hollow staggered back from her, their forms flickering between terror and something that looked almost like tears. This is what human dreams contain. We cannot, the hollow whispered. It is too much, too intense, too bright. Then learn to take smaller sips, Una suggested. And she found herself smiling despite everything, because the monsters of her nightmares suddenly looked more like frightened children than ancient predators. But even as the hollow struggled to process what Una had given them, she noticed something else in the depths of their realm. A darkness that moved with purpose. A presence that made even these nightmare beings tremble. What is that? Una demanded. The hollow turned to look at the approaching darkness, and their borrowed faces showed an emotion that Una had never seen from them before, pure, undiluted terror. The reason we wanted to escape, they answered. The thing that has been consuming us piece by piece for millennia. The thing the precursors truly feared. Una realized the darkness drew closer, and Una felt the golden cord connecting her to reality begin to fray as something far worse than the hollow turned its attention toward her. You need to wake up, the hollow urged, their voices carrying genuine concern for the first time since this nightmare began. You need to run before it notices you. But Una stood her ground because she had not come this far to run from another monster. And somewhere in the waking world, the council watched her vital signs spike with readings that should have been impossible for any living being. The chamber was hidden deep within Convergence Point Station, accessible only through a series of maintenance tunnels that twisted and turned until Una lost all sense of direction. Daxare led her through the darkness with the confidence of someone who had walked this path many times before. And Una followed on legs that trembled with exhaustion but refused to give out when they finally emerged into the meeting room. Yuna found herself facing a gathering of aliens from at least a dozen different species, and every single one of them looked like they had not slept properly in far too long. The human key, a massive reptilian creature, rumbled from across the chamber, his yellow eyes fixed on Yuna with an intensity that made her want to shrink back into the shadows. Her name is Dr. Yuna Xiang, Dexari corrected, and she has resisted the hollow for 3 weeks, despite having no knowledge of what she was facing. A murmur rippled through the assembly, and Yuna saw expressions shifting from suspicion to something that might have been respect. Come forward. The crystalline form of Morath delegate Crystalline Voice of Dawn chimed, and Yuna was surprised to see her here among this secret council. We have much to discuss and little time remaining. Yuna walked to the center of the chamber on unsteady feet, feeling the weight of dozens of alien gazes pressing against her like physical force. You know what they are, she said, her voice stronger than she expected. So tell me how to fight them. The hollow cannot be fought in any conventional sense, a small furry being explained, its 6 eyes blinking in a pattern that Yuna found oddly comforting. They exist between states of consciousness, feeding on the emotional energy generated by dreaming minds. Then how did the precursors seal them away? Yuna asked. The council members exchanged glances that carried the weight of ancient grief. And finally it was Dexari who answered, the precursors created the realm where the hollow are imprisoned, he explained. They wove it from their own consciousness, sacrificing their entire species to build a cage strong enough to contain entities made of pure nightmare. The seals scattered across dead worlds are anchor points for that prison. Crystalline Voice of Dawn added, and when you touched one on Remnant 7, you absorbed a fragment of precursor consciousness that now makes you a potential doorway between realms. Yuna felt sick as the full scope of her situation became clear. Her body housing something that could doom the entire galaxy if she lost control of it, even for a moment. Why me? She demanded. Why did touching the seal affect me when it probably ignored thousands of other beings over millions of years? Humans dream differently than any other species we have encountered, the furry being said. Your minds generate emotional intensity. During sleep, that dwarfs what most species produce in their entire lifetimes. The hollow noticed you, Dexari continued. They tasted your dreams through the cracks in their prison and found them more nourishing than anything they had experienced since being sealed away. So I am both the key they want and the feast they crave. Yuna said bitterly, you are also our best hope for stopping them permanently. Crystalline Voice of Dawn chimed, and the unexpected statement made Yuna look up sharply. What do you mean? We have been preparing for the eventual failure of the precursor seals for millennia, the Morath delegate explained, gathering knowledge from every species that survived encounters with the hollow, developing techniques that might give us a fighting chance when they finally broke free. Ancient Morath meditation practices allow practitioners to enter a controlled dream state while maintaining partial consciousness, another council member added. A state where one can confront entities of the sleeping realm without being completely at their mercy. You want me to fight the hollow in their own territory, Yuna said. And she was not sure if the idea terrified her or gave her hope. We want you to anchor yourself to reality while entering the dream realm, Dexari corrected. To face the hollow with the full force of human emotional intensity, while remaining connected to your waking self. Yuna considered the proposal, turning it over in her exhausted mind and searching for the flaws that would surely get her killed. What happens if I lose? She asked. The hollow gain access to reality through your mind, the furry being said grimly. And they will feed on every dreaming consciousness. They can reach until the galaxy is empty of all thought. And if I win, we do not know. Crystalline Voice of Dawn admitted. No one has ever truly defeated the hollow, only contained them. Yuna was about to respond when alarms began blaring throughout the station, their harsh tones cutting through the hidden chamber with urgent warning. What is happening? She demanded. Dexari pulled out a communication device and listened to the rapid stream of information pouring through it, his compound eyes widening in an expression that Yuna had learned to recognize as horror. Every sleeping being on Convergence Point has begun screaming simultaneously, he reported. The medical bays are overwhelmed with patients experiencing the same nightmare. They are pushing through. Yuna realized. The Hollow are done waiting for me to surrender. She turned to the council with determination burning through her exhaustion, pushing back the fear that wanted to consume her. Teach me the meditation technique now, she demanded. I will not let them hurt anyone else because of me. The council members moved quickly, surrounding Yuna with their various forms and beginning to chant in languages so old that her translator could not process them. Close your eyes, crystalline voice of dawn instructed. Focus on my voice as an anchor to reality while we guide you into the space between. Yuna obeyed, letting her burning eyes finally close, while holding desperately to the thread of consciousness that would keep her connected to the waking world. As she sank into the meditative trance, she felt the Hollow reaching for her with eager anticipation. But this time, she was not running from them. This time, she was coming to meet them on her own terms, and somewhere deep in her mind, where human dreams burn brighter than any star, Yuna felt something ancient and powerful stirring in response to her determination. The precursor fragment she carried was waking up, and it had been waiting for someone brave enough to use it. Dr. Yuna Siang pressed her fingers against her temples and tried to focus on the alien words flowing through her translator device. But everything sounded like it was coming from underwater, and her vision kept blurring at the edges, like someone had smeared grease across her eyes. 4 days without sleep had turned her body into a battlefield where exhaustion fought against terror. And terror was winning by the smallest margin possible. The conference room aboard Convergence Point Station hummed with tension as the insectoid Vethkai ambassador clicked and chirped at his crystalline Morath counterpart. And Yuna was supposed to be translating their words into something both species could understand. But her hands were shaking so badly that she had to grip the edge of the table just to stay upright. Dr. Siang, the Vethkai ambassador, Dexari said, his compound eyes reflecting her haggard face back at her in 100 tiny fragments. Are you unwell? I am fine, Yuna lied. And she had become very good at lying over the past 3 weeks because the alternative was explaining something that nobody would believe. She reached into her pocket and pulled out another stimulant pill, swallowing it dry without caring that both alien ambassadors were watching her with expressions that ranged from concern to curiosity. Humans require significant rest periods, the Morath delegate crystalline voice of dawn observed, her body chiming softly as light passed through her geometric form. Yet you have not returned to your quarters in 96 standard hours, according to station records. I am dedicated to these negotiations, Yuna said, forcing a smile that felt like cracking ice across her face. And sleep can wait until we have reached an agreement between your peoples. It was a reasonable excuse, and the aliens accepted it because they did not understand what happened to humans when they dreamed. And they certainly did not understand what had started happening to Yuna specifically ever since that archaeological dig on the dead world called Remnant 7. 3 weeks ago, she had touched something she should not have touched. A pillar of black stone covered in symbols that seemed to writhe and dance when she looked at them directly. And that night when she fell asleep, she found herself somewhere else entirely. The place had no proper shape or form, just endless shifting geometry that hurt to look at and whispers that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. And the beings that lived there had noticed her immediately. They called themselves the Hollow, and they were hungry in a way that made Yuna's soul feel cold, just remembering it. You dream so brightly, they had told her in Voices that sounded like her dead mother and her childhood friends and every person she had ever loved. And we have been starving for so very long in this prison between worlds. They wanted her to open a door for them, a passage from their realm of nightmares into the waking universe where living beings walked and breathed and dreamed such delicious dreams. And every time Yuna fell asleep, they pulled her back to that terrible place and made their demands again. She had refused them 17 times now, and each refusal cost her something precious because they knew how to hurt her in ways that left no marks on her body but carved deep wounds into her mind. The Vuthkai proposal regarding mineral rights in the contested nebula is unacceptable, crystalline voice of Dawn was saying, and Yuna forced herself to translate even though the words felt like stones in her mouth. We require a minimum of 60% allocation to sustain our breeding matrices. Vexari's mandibles clicked in what Yuna had learned to recognize as frustration, and he responded with a counteroffer that she dutifully translated while her eyelids grew heavier with each passing moment. The stimulants were failing her, burning through her system faster than they could work because her body had adapted to them over 4 days of constant use. And she could feel sleep reaching for her like cold hands emerging from dark water. I need a brief recess, Yuna said suddenly, standing up so fast that her chair scraped against the floor with a sound that made both ambassadors flinch. Please excuse me for 5 minutes. She did not wait for permission before stumbling toward the door, her legs feeling like they belonged to someone else entirely. And she made it 3 steps into the corridor before her knees buckled beneath her. The floor rushed up to meet her face, and Yuna had just enough time to feel the cold metal against her cheek before the darkness swallowed her whole. She opened her eyes in the realm of the hollow, and they were waiting for her with smiles that wore familiar faces. Welcome back, they said with her father's voice, a man who had died when she was 12 years old. We have missed you so terribly much. Let me go, Yuna demanded. But her voice came out weak and trembling because she was so tired and so afraid and so completely alone in this nightmare that never seemed to end. Open the door for us, the hollow crooned, surrounding her with shapes that kept almost resolving into people she recognized. And we will let you sleep peacefully forever. I would rather die, Yuna spat back at them. And she meant it with every fiber of her exhausted being. The hollow laughed, and it was the worst sound she had ever heard because it contained echoes of every laugh she had ever loved, twisted into something cruel and hungry. You cannot die here, they reminded her. You can only suffer until you give us what we want. They reached for her with hands made of shadow and memory, and Yuna screamed as they began to show her visions of what they would do to everyone she cared about once they finally broke free somewhere far away. In the waking world she was desperate to return to. Alarms began to blare as her unconscious body convulsed on the floor of Convergence Point Station. Run! Yuna screamed, and somehow that word tore through the barrier between dreaming and waking, emerging from her physical lips with enough force to freeze every being within earshot. In the medical bay where they carried her moments later, the alien physicians exchanged worried glances as their human patient thrashed against her restraints and screamed warnings about things that lurked in the space between sleep and consciousness and in the shadows of the station, watching through the dreams of sleeping beings throughout the sector. The hollow smiled their borrowed smiles and prepared for the feast that was surely coming. They had waited for millennia already, and they could wait a little longer for their key to finally break, but not much longer. They decided as they tasted the fear rolling off Yuna's dreaming mind like sweet perfume. Not much longer at all. The realm of the hollow stretched endlessly in every direction, a landscape of shifting angles and impossible colors that made Yuna's eyes water with pain whenever she tried to focus on any single point. She stood on ground that felt solid but looked like flowing water, surrounded by shapes that kept almost becoming recognizable before melting back into abstract horror. "You are so stubborn," the hollow said. And this time, they wore the face of her mother, a woman who had died in a shuttle accident when Yuna was 19. "We only want to be free. You want to feed," Yuna shot back, her voice hoarse from screaming. "I read the warnings carved into that pillar on Remnant 7 before I touched it. And I know what you did to the species that came before us." The thing wearing her mother's face smiled. And it was wrong in ways that made Yuna's stomach turn, because her mother had never smiled with that much teeth. "We were hungry," the hollow admitted without shame. And the galaxy was full of dreamers who had never learned to protect their sleeping minds. Around them, the other hollow drifted closer, wearing faces that Yuna recognized from every stage of her life. And each one added their voice to the chorus that echoed through this nightmare realm. "The precursors locked us away," they said. "Sealed us in the space between sleep and waking where we could watch but never touch. They should have destroyed you." Yuna said. "They tried," the hollow laughed. "But we are made of dreams and nightmares. And you cannot kill something that exists only in the minds of sleeping beings." Yuna felt her consciousness flickering, her connection to this place weakening as her body in the waking world fought against the forced sleep. And she clung to that sensation like a lifeline. "You touched the seal," her false mother continued, reaching out with hands that looked so real but felt like cold fog against Yuna's skin. "And now you carry a piece of it inside you. A key that can open our prison if only you would dream in the right place. I will never help you." Yuna swore. "Then we will take what we need," the hollow replied, and suddenly they were everywhere at once, pressing against her mind with the weight of countless, hungry entities that had been starving for longer than human civilization had existed. They showed her visions of Earth burning, of her colleagues on Convergence Point dying in their sleep as nightmares devoured them from within, of children across 1,000 worlds screaming for parents who would never wake up. "This is what will happen if you keep refusing us," they promised. "We will find another way eventually, and when we do, we will remember your stubbornness." Yuna wanted to give in so badly, wanted to make the vision stop and let the exhaustion finally claim her. But something deep inside her refused to break, even as the hollow tore at her resolve with claws made of fear and despair. She opened her mouth to scream again, to reject them one more time, but before she could speak, something pulled her violently back toward consciousness. The medical bay materialized around her, in fragments of light and sound, and Yuna found herself strapped to a bed with restraints around her wrists and ankles, while alien physicians clustered around monitoring equipment that beeped and hummed with concern. "She is waking," someone said. And Yuna blinked until her vision cleared enough to see the insectoid form of Ambassador Dexari standing at the foot of her bed. "How long?" Yuna croaked, her throat raw and aching. 7 hours, Dexari replied. And his voice carried none of the diplomatic smoothness she had grown accustomed to during the negotiations. "You would not stop screaming, and when we tried to sedate you further, your vital signs became dangerously unstable." Yuna laughed, and it came out sounding more like a sob, because of course sedation would make things worse when the problem was sleep itself. "We need to talk," she said, struggling against her restraints. "Somewhere private. Somewhere they cannot hear." "They," Dexari repeated, his compound eyes studying her with an intensity that made Yuna feel like a specimen under a microscope. "The things in my dreams," Yuna said. "The things that have been hunting me since Remnant 7. The change that came over Dexari was immediate and terrifying, his entire body going rigid as his mandibles clicked in a pattern that Yuna had never heard before. Something that sounded almost like fear. "Clear the room," Dexari ordered the medical staff, and his voice carried an authority that sent them scurrying for the exits without question when they were alone. The Vethkai ambassador moved closer to Yuna's bed and leaned down until his alien face was mere inches from hers. "We know what hunts you, human," he said quietly. "Our ancestors faced them too. Your people survived them," Yuna said. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt something like hope stirring in her chest. "No," Dexari replied. And that single word crushed her hope as quickly as it had bloomed. "Our ancestors did not survive, not really." "Not the way you mean." He reached up with one clawed hand and tapped against the side of his head, against the hard carapace that protected his brain. "The Vethkai you see today are not the same species that first encountered the Hollow," he explained. "We rebuilt ourselves from the genetic archives after they finished feeding. After there was nothing left of our civilization but bones and empty shells." "How did they stop?" Yuna asked. "The precursors intervened," Dexari said. "They sealed the Hollow away at the cost of their own existence. And the galaxy has slept peacefully ever since." He paused, and Yuna could see something shifting behind his compound eyes. Something that looked almost like sympathy. "Until now," he finished. "Until you touched one of their seals and became a key that could let them back into our reality." Yuna closed her eyes and felt tears streaming down her cheeks because she had not asked for this, had not wanted to become the potential destroyer of civilizations. And she was so tired that death seemed almost preferable to another moment of wakefulness. "There is a council," Dexari said. "A secret gathering of species who remember what the Hollow did and who have been preparing for their eventual return. Take me to them," Yuna demanded, opening her eyes with renewed determination. "If there is any way to fight these things, I need to know about it." Dexari nodded slowly, then reached down and began unfastening her restraints. "The council meets in 6 hours," he said. "Try not to fall asleep before then." Yuna laughed again, and this time it sounded almost genuine because the Vethkai ambassador had just made a joke. And somehow that small moment of connection made her feel less alone than she had in weeks. "I will do my best," she promised. And she meant it with every fiber of her exhausted being.